Hi, everyone. We'll get going as more people are coming in from the waiting room. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our crowd conversation. I'm Gretchen Worth, and I direct the Susan Christopherson Center for Community Planning, which supports New York State communities working toward a more equitable, climate resilient built environment. The Christopherson Center is one of the founding partners of CROWD, which stands for Circularity, Reuse, and Zero Waste Development, and we organize crowd conversations. So today's crowd conversation features Christine O'Malley from Historic Ithaca, who will be sharing how preservation advocacy is contributing to circular construction economy efforts in central New York and beyond. And Historic Ithaca and Christine is a founding partner of the Crowd Network, and we're really pleased to have her joining us tonight. The conversation tonight is moderated by Brian McCracken, Historic Preservation and Neighborhood Planner at the City of Ithaca. Brian studied early American history as an undergraduate and holds a master's degree in historic preservation planning from Cornell University. He has served as the historic preservation and neighborhood planner for the City of Ithaca since 2014. In this role, Brian staffs the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission and implements long-range planning strategies to retain and preserve the community's unique historic resources and character during a period of rapid development and growth. Brian, thanks for being here. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping details. We're going to keep this conversation to an hour, including Q&A. So we do welcome your questions and conversation at the end. So please type things into the chat as we go along, and we'll jump right into those at the end of Christine's presentation. And please keep yourselves muted so everybody can hear Christine. This is our final crowd conversation before we break for the summer, and we are starting to plan our fall lineup of conversations. So if you are interested to present on your work around the circular construction economy, or if you'd like to suggest a person or a topic, then please either put that in the chat or email me directly at projectdirector@christophersonCenter.org, and I'll put that in the chat. Or just make a suggestion through the Crowd website. There's a submission form available at crowd.org, crowd with a zero, for zero waste development. So it's not too late if you have suggestions on topics that you'd like to hear or people you'd like to hear from. So we have people joining us tonight from across New York State and beyond. I'm based in Ithaca, so I would like to acknowledge that Ithaca is on the traditional homelands of the Gaikahono, the Cayuga Nation. The Gaikahono are members of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, an alliance of 6 sovereign nations with a historic and contemporary presence on the land. The Confederacy precedes the establishment of Ithaca, New York State, and the United States of America. We acknowledge the painful history of Gaikahono dispossession and honor the ongoing connection of Gaikahono people, past and present, to these lands and waters. So Christine and Brian, thank you so much for being here tonight. Brian, I will turn it over to you, and thank you all for joining us.
Right. Thank you, Gretchen. I am excited this evening to introduce Christine O'Malley, the Historic Preservation Services Director at Historic Ithaca. Historic Ithaca was a founding member of CROWD, as Gretchen mentioned, and I'm excited to hear more about the organization and Christine's work. Now, Christine, I hand the presentation over to you.
Great, thanks. I am just gonna set up my presentation here. So tonight we're going to talk about the greenest building is the one that's already built. And I just want to start by giving a bit of background about our organization. So Historic Ithaca and our reuse store Significant Elements are located at 210 and 212 Center Street in Ithaca, New York. And we are Tompkins County only historic preservation organization. We were founded in 1966 as a nonprofit 501c3 focusing on historic preservation in Ithaca and Tompkins County. So we're almost 60 years old. Since our founding, we have served as the local voice of preservation with the goal of promoting the repair, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse of existing buildings and landscapes. So let's talk a little bit about the title we have tonight for the talk. So the greenest building is the one that is already built. This is a phrase that the architect Carl Elefante came up with. And we want to think about this term, this phrase that he's coined, and how it relates to historic preservation, sustainability, and circularity. So this is what we'll think about today. So historic Ithaca got its beginnings back in the early 1960s. Ithaca lost several historic buildings through urban renewal in its downtown core. And the first loss, sadly, was the Cornell Library that you see on the left there, the building that ironically is on the city seal. So this building doesn't even stand any longer, but it's on our city seal. It's now the site, as you can see on the right-hand side, of an ATM drive-up parking area. So its destruction and its loss was something that really concerned people. The next to fall, sadly, was the old City Hall building that you see on the postcard on the left there, that was just across the street from the Cornell Library. And that was demolished in 1966. And these two big losses just across the street from each other prompted the formation of Historic Ithaca by concerned residents. So where the Seneca Street parking garage is now, on that far end, that's where the old City Hall used to be. Beautiful Greek Revival building that sadly was lost. So by the 1970s, efforts coalesced around saving other downtown buildings, and Historic Ithaca was most famously involved in saving the Clinton House, rehabilitating it, and used it as offices that it rented out to other organizations and its own offices for many decades. And that was one of its most notable galvanizing saves, because that could have been lost. And by extending its life, and it's still in use today, by New Routes Charter School and other offices, it really put into action the idea that the Greenest building is the one that is already built. Another early save was the Boardman House in DeWitt Park, at one time building owned by Ithaca College, and later under threat of demolitions by Tompkins County. And the effort to save the Boardman House really developed a spirit of valuing existing buildings and inspired an early adaptive reuse of the former DeWitt High School that you see in the postcard there on the top right, and in its present day view on Google Maps, aerial view there on the right. Architect William Downing bought the empty former school building and converted it into the successful mixed-use complex that we see today. So one of Ithaca's really early adaptive reuse projects that really showed the viability of putting effort and time into adaptively reusing buildings. By the 1970s, the city of Ithaca had established a preservation ordinance and began the process of designating individual buildings in historic districts, several of which you see here on the map and are listed here on the right-hand side. Like many other cities and communities across the nation, and encouraged by the establishment in 1966 of the National Historic Preservation Act, Ithaca began to really recognize the value of its existing buildings to the life of the community. So over the years, the city of Ithaca's planning department, where Brian works, established the position of a preservation and neighborhood planner. And with the work of the Ithaca Landmarks Preservation Commission, they set up design guidelines to help owners of listed buildings and in historic districts to make appropriate repairs and alterations to their buildings. And that's the cover that you see there, the design guidelines on the screen. So in 2025, we can sort of firmly say that we've arrived at a point where we can think about preservation and building rehabilitation as the most sustainable and highest and best use of a building. So we look at this image here from the Just Places Lab of the building reuse to waste hierarchy. You can see at the very top that building maintenance and preservation are the best, most preferred uses, with adaptive reuse coming next, and then overbuilding and expansion, or whole building relocation, and then deconstruction. And the very bottom, obviously, the least preferred is demolition and landfilling. So that is waste. So this is an extension of the life of a building is in maintenance and preservation and adaptive reuse. And this is really representing the core of what Carl Elefante is saying about the Greenest building. It's the one that's already built, right? The building is already here, the embodied carbon used to create the building is there in its materials. All that energy has already been expended to build it. And to build new would require brand new materials with new energy expended. So that's when we start getting into burning and or the wasteful way of building. Conserving building materials saves embodied carbon. And if we look at these examples, they're all from Ithaca. So this is a way of thinking about a sort of spectrum of preservation and reuse. So the first top left slide there is the Cascadilla Boathouse, which was preserved and rehabilitated to continue in use for rowers into the future in Stewart Park. We also have seen in our community the moving of whole buildings. So the Yellow House, the Greek Revival House being moved there on Coddington Road, was moved in 2016 down the road and is currently, I believe, on the market for sale. It was successfully put on a new foundation. And then on the right, above the Kerry building, we have Rev, which is an overbuild, a new building on top of 2 stories of a brick building. And then we've also got examples in Ithaca of retaining elements in situ. So the Ironworks building on State Street saved part of the facade inside of an existing 19th century brick building. And then we get into the cases when preservation is not possible. Deconstruction and building material reuse is better than demolition. And you see examples there from the Catherine Commons project up in College Town at Cornell. So in 2020, Historic Ithaca came face to face with this reality with the demolition of the Chicona block in College Town here in Ithaca near the Cornell campus. We had a quick sort of single day of rush salvage before the building was demolished. And you can see the sad demolition in the image on the left, and on the right, some of the salvage taking place inside the ground floor before the building was demolished. And this really was one of the main reasons why we were able to found a crowd with our partners, the Just Places Lab and the Circular Construction Lab at Cornell, the Susan Christopherson Center, Packney, and Finger Lakes Reuse. This was really one of our sort of motivations to not see what you see on the left-hand side, that sort of demolition and waste. For all of us, this sort of scale of waste was pretty distressing, and it really drove home for us the need to think about the full life cycle of buildings and building materials. So the wood in the column that you see over there on the right-hand side, they were some of the items that came out of the Chicona block and were brought to our reuse and salvage store, Significant Elements, where they were sold. There is an active market, obviously, for building material. This is something that people want and people need and are looking to use in their building projects. And I think it's important to sort of think about this quote from, from Alison Arlotta about what preservation should be thinking about. You know, we often think just about designating and categorizing and stabilizing, but we also need to think about the heritage value through material reuse that may allow the field to develop, as she says, new tools and practices for the future and support communities facing increasing environmental change. So if we cannot save whole buildings, we definitely need to think about the materials and essentially the green that is within them, as Elefante is mentioning. So Significant Elements, our reuse stores, certainly helps us do that. And this is where the connection between preservation and circularity is really evident. So if we can't save entire buildings, then we can certainly salvage and deconstruct and sell material. So in 1991, our organization started Significant Elements, our salvage and reuse store, to serve our community and to promote sustainability. And it's located at the corner of Center and Plain Street. And you can find all sorts of old house parts, windows, doors, lighting, old furniture, all sorts of treasures. And last year we salvaged 35,000 items to sell in our store. So there is a lot out there that should definitely not end up in the landfill. And all of these items have a value and purpose for us. They can be sold to people searching for house parts and all sorts of things. This keeps it out of the waste stream. And they can be used to teach people as well about historic house parts and furniture. Historic Ithaca began the Work Preserve program in 2010, a job training program to educate young adults who have traditional and non-traditional barriers to employment. And many of our donated and salvaged goods can be used for training and education purposes. We also continue to advocate and remain engaged in discussions of buildings that will not be adaptively reused. So some of you from Ithaca might know these two buildings on North Tioga Street that were purchased by Tompkins County as the site for their future center of government project. We've been advocating for their careful future deconstruction in order to keep all the material that you see there as much as possible out of the landfill. And I think we've helped move the needle in the discussions within the county that they are seriously discussing this and have this as part of their future planning for the site. So we also at Historic Ithaca want to promote and recognize reuse and rehabilitation projects through a number of means, not just through advocacy, but we also want to applaud and highlight people when they do a great job. So we have an annual preservation awards program that recognizes outstanding projects in Ithaca and Tompkins County. And the Preservation Award program really celebrates this idea that the greenest building is the one that has already been built. And I'm just going to show you a few examples from recent years and recent award winners. So this is 108 Eddy Street, a winner from last year. Rehabilitation using historic tax credits, which is a fantastic program that can make this economically viable. It was an existing apartment building designed and built by William H. Miller, famous Ithaca architect, that had fallen into some sort of disrepair and really needed some upgrades. And it was successfully rehabilitated and is now providing rental housing by improving and maintaining the building. So this was a real win. I mean, the apartments are beautifully updated. They took the time to repair windows and all sorts of features to make it attractive. And I think this is what we should think about, because often we think about buildings in College Town and the story is, oh, there's such a mess that can never be repaired. But I think this is a good example showing that, in fact, they can. And there's, with investment, you can have a great project. This is another multi-unit intentional community on West State Street that was an award winner. Sat empty and really almost abandoned for a number of years and had a massive hole in its roof. And it was rehabilitated as well using historic tax credits. And again, is providing essential affordable housing within the downtown Ithaca area. So beautiful late 19th century building that was originally built as a single family home has now seen investment and repair and is now a multi-unit intentional community. Another more recent project and another award winner from last year at the bottom of this East State Street Hill is the Dean. And this was a former storage warehouse that had been converted to offices and was used as offices in the 90s for a few decades. And then once the office market started to flatten out, the owner decided that the building would make a good case to be rehabilitated into rental apartments. And that's what it is now. So I think these projects show that the investment in a building's future is really an investment in sustainability. And I think that really is very illustrative of how the Greenest building is the one already built. So this building already existed. It just needed conversion for it to have a new life. So I hope that these examples demonstrate that there is this really vital network and connection between preservation, sustainability, and circularity, and that we shouldn't think of preservation as something that just sets something in amber and leaves it in time, but to see the value in that building, in the existing building, and what it can offer for the future once it is maintained or adaptively reused. And I think that's the end of our images. So I wanted to make sure that we had a lot of time for questions. So Brian and I discussed this a little, and we wanted to encourage people to ask questions, and maybe if you are curious about the difference between our two entities and what we do, we can clarify that for people as well.
All right. Thank you, Christine. That was great information. So to kick it off, I'm gonna lead with a question, and then hopefully others will chime in. So Ithaca recently, in the last 5 years, adopted a Green New Deal policy where we plan to be carbon neutral within the next decade. Can you talk a little bit about how historic Ithaca and historic preservation in general contribute to these efforts?
Yeah, and I think this is an important question, because a lot of times people think like old buildings, inefficient, can never be updated, can never be converted, etc. But they can, in fact. And I think what we're seeing more and more within the city of Ithaca is older buildings, for example, getting air source heat pumps, or some older buildings actually getting solar panels on their roof. And 2 summers ago, we had an intern who worked for Brian in developing a sort of best practices guide for older homes in historic districts, or older properties in historic districts that wanted to add air source heat pumps. And it was sort of a really helpful document, because more and more people were coming to ILPC to get approvals and certificate of appropriateness documents for energy efficiency upgrades. So there is a lot that can be done with an older building, and can be made energy efficient.
Yeah, that's great, Christine. I would just like to add, the Dean is one of its neighbors is the Argos Inn, which is a pretty incredible rehabilitation project. It was formerly a residential structure that was converted into a boutique hotel, probably 10 years ago now, but it is LEED certified with ground source heat pumps, and it used the tax credits and other incentives to really bring a building that was built in the 1830s to the 2020s, and it's pretty incredible. So is that document available online? So the question from Smith, which document are you specifically referencing?
Well, she talked about a guide they put together for homeowners. She just mentioned it.
Oh, yes, that is available.
Yep.
You can either contact us directly, or Christine, I believe it's posted on the Historic Ithaca website. Is that correct?
Yeah, under our toolkit, energy toolkit information, you should be able to find it there. And then Brian, of course, has PDFs that he can email to you, certainly. And that's really helpful.
All right. So Christine, maybe it would be helpful to explain a little bit the difference between our jobs. Historic Ithaca is a very separate entity from the city of Ithaca and the historic preservation planning program there. So if you don't mind just explaining the difference.
Sure. So Historic Ithaca is an independent 501c3 nonprofit that does education, offers technical services. We have the reuse store, we have the work preserve program, and we also do some advocacy work and sort of helping people with various issues. So we are completely separate from the city of Ithaca. So Brian is a city of Ithaca employee, and with his job, he is working with the ILPC, and they are the regulatory body overseeing certificates of appropriateness for homeowners and property owners in any historic district or individually listed building. So when people sometimes call us and say like, oh, I need to get permission to do a change outside on my door and my front porch. Can you tell me what to do? I have to direct them to Brian because that's Brian's department. The paperwork gets filed with Brian. Brian works with the property owner, and 95% of the time, I think, Brian, it's a staff level of approval. If not, if it's a larger project, more complicated project, then it goes to the monthly ILPC meeting.
Yes, that's correct. So last year we reviewed 100 proposed alterations to landmarked properties in the city, and only, I think, about 15 of them were reviewed by the Landmarks Commission. Most of them I review and approve at what we call the staff level. Some communities call it an administrative review or a desk review. We had two really interesting questions come into the chat, one related to zoning. So have you come across any challenges with rezoning restrictions when updating or repurposing buildings?
I mean, I haven't, and maybe Brian, you know more because you see building permits and things coming across your desk. I can't think of any particular Ithaca example, but maybe you might know something that you've seen.
Yeah, in terms of what's great about the city's planning department is we're an integrated department that includes the historic preservation planning, zoning, long-range planning, the planning board, and we are in the same offices as the building division, or your code and housing inspectors. So whenever there is a historic property that will be reused, there's always a great conversation in the department about how to facilitate that reuse. Sometimes it does require an applicant or a property owner to go to the BZA, Board of Zoning Appeals, for a use variance, but most of the time we look at our zoning with reuse in mind. We have an incredibly complicated zoning map, but we try to take into account existing neighborhood characters and allow for uses that would be supported in the adaptive reuse of a building. So the Dean, the example that Christine used as kind of a two-time adaptive reuse. That building is in I believe in a B zone, so a business zone, which allows for multifamily as well as a business use. So there was this, long-range plan to allow that building to grow into the future and into what the community needs. The same thing with 310 West State Street. That was the green building that was rehabilitated into a communal living facility. Before that was reused, its most recent use had been an office. So as we rezone, we look at our neighborhoods, we're always thinking about not only what the building could be used for now, but what might make sense for in the future. And we do that through our long-range planning process. So we have another question. Is it challenging for historic preservation community to make the shift from advocating for preservation to supporting the deconstruction of a given building at the point when it becomes clear that preservation will not be approved/viable? Thinking of the center of government project, initially preservation of some of these buildings was advocated as examples of specific phase of modern architecture.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. I think that's a very good question. It is challenging. I think that in the past, sometimes preservationists were very black and white about advocating for the preservation of a building. And they wanted to save everything. And then if something was going to be demolished, then, sometimes they would, sort of like, well, walk away from it, that's the sad fate. Or, like they might take one or two notable features from the building and sort of, lament then its loss. And I think that there definitely has been an important evolution or development within preservation, excuse me, thinking about material and thinking about the spectrum of preservation and thinking about if you cannot save that entire building, then you should think about the building sort of in reverse, like from when it was constructed. Okay, so it was constructed and built with this material. Now it should be deconstructed to save the material or have an opportunity for reuse for the material, because otherwise it will end up in the landfill. And we know statistically from crowd research that close to 90% of the building material that heads to a landfill has an opportunity for reuse in some form or fashion or recycling. So we, especially in New York State, we really have to think about, and everywhere we have to think about landfills, because we can't just keep on piling all sorts of construction and demolition debris into these landfills. I mean, the tonnage that goes in there is just astounding. And we have landfills that will be full, and we have a crisis with landfills and landfills closing. So we really have to think very carefully about those materials and what's happening to them and how they can be saved. So I think, for many people in preservation, it's hard sometimes to think about deconstruction, and they don't, and I fully understand this. A lot of people don't want deconstruction just to become the default. And they still want buildings to be adaptively reused or rehabilitated. And we still want that as well. I think just adding in deconstruction into that spectrum is really important. So it is, with the Center of Government project, obviously, I'm sad that those buildings couldn't have another life in some form in the new building project. But I am glad at least that the needle was moved toward a whole discussion of deconstruction rather than just crushing the buildings down and there being an incredible amount of waste.
Yeah. To that, I would just add that it's also helping preservationists understand that we're returning to a traditional building practice of deconstruction. If you look at ancient ruins, there's evidence of building and material reuse. So it's something that has historically been around, but the trade was lost in the post-World War II period. And I think there are many buildings throughout every community that people love that are built out of salvaged materials and deconstructed materials. And so helping preservationists understand that this is another, or could be another, preservation trade, that, while the building may not still be standing, it could, give life. One crowd member likes to use the analogy of the organ donor. These building materials could give life to another historic structure that may be failing. So we have another question here. It looks like from Syracuse. Is there ever a shortage of homes that might be eligible for deconstruction? And if so, is there an openness to do work in surrounding counties? Was just thinking here in Syracuse, New York, there was a pilot program run by the Syracuse Land Bank, but I'm not sure where things stalled. So perhaps, Christine, this would be a great opportunity to talk about in a little more detail about the deconstruction project on College Ave and how that worked, the partners that were involved, and how other partners in the community are coming together around the idea of creating a deconstruction economy.
Yeah, and this is the big question because you know, a lot of other communities across the country have been involved in deconstruction or set up deconstruction ordinances. We know out in the West Coast, we know San Antonio. If you look at our crowd website, you can see where deconstruction ordinances are already in play. And it has to be done pretty thoughtfully because one of the big issues is that when you decide to take apart a building, you want to have a ready market for the material so that you don't have to ship it, you know, 3 states away or it sits in a warehouse. So often one of the issues right away is to identify the immediate or almost immediate reuse of that material. You know, is someone going to come and collect it right away? Or does it need some sorting or denailing and it needs to be stored somewhere? And a lot of the big operations on the West Coast that we've looked at, they have dedicated facilities to store the material. And they have figured out how to keep that sort of system clear so that material comes in, it's priced, it's organized, it's graded, and it goes back out. And that is the big challenge in deconstruction. I think making sure that the materials don't sit too long, that they get reused locally if possible. And then the other challenge too is making sure that you build up a contractor workforce who wants to do this work and can do this work. You know, contractors are instructed and taught how to build buildings, and they also can learn how to take them apart. And that was part of the College Town Catherine Commons project. That was a grant-funded project with a Cornell Circular Construction Lab, and Finger Lakes Reuse was involved in it, and a lot of crowd partners volunteered. That was a special sort of situation where they were trying to understand how using a panelizing system after salvaging the buildings, you know, could work for material reuse. And Dave Bennick, who came in from the West Coast, came to help instruct and show some of the union members how that could be done. So they were on site from various trades, you know, participating in that project. And I'd encourage you to watch the video on the crowd website, and I think it's linked to it, that shows this whole project. Because you know, it talks about many of these issues and raises these questions about really how can you build back better? You know, what can you do with that material? How can you take down a building without creating tremendous amount of waste?
Mhm.
If I could just chime in really quickly
Mhm.
to that question. So Manila, Crowd is a statewide organization. Although it started in Tompkins County and Cuba County, we now have Crowd members in every single region of New York State. And so in all of these different regions, there are deconstruction projects happening to a greater or lesser extent. Sometimes it's simply salvaging, you know, soft stripping rather than a full deconstruction, but it is occurring. And we do statewide a lot of policy work at the local and state levels. And so an exciting funding opportunity is coming from DEC to support reuse, building material reuse efforts that were previously available. This funding was available previously only to municipal governments. And in the next funding cycle, funding for reuse activities, potentially deconstruction, will also be available to nonprofits like the Syracuse Land Bank, for instance. So it's something we've just learned about and we're keeping our eye on it, but there is momentum building across the state for this kind of work, you know, not just in Tompkins County. So we're really excited about that. And you know, stay tuned anytime. And anyone on this call is welcome to join the Crowd Network. So please reach out.
Mhm. That's actually a great segue for our next question. So, do local or state building codes need to be changed to be able to use or grade deconstructed materials so they can be used in new construction? So, I'm guessing, Gretchen, you might be the best one to address this question in the conversations that are happening at the state level.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
just had a conversation this morning at our
We
morning
did.
policy meeting. So this is a perfect lead
Yeah.
into Gretchen. So Gretchen, go ahead and you can tell Annie about and everyone what's going on at the state.
Sure. So there, in fact, is a bill that has been introduced in our state legislature that does exactly this, and that allows for the grading or regrading of structural lumber to be used structurally. So if you were to reuse something, aesthetically as a backsplash or, something like that, there is no issue with the building code. But structurally, it could and should be regraded. So there is a bill that was introduced by Anna Kellis in the House, and then her Senate counterpart, Brian Kavanaugh, in the Senate. It passed unanimously in the Senate. So we are hopeful that it can move through the House, if not in this session, then to be renumbered and reintroduced at the next session of the legislature. The language around this bill is taken from our colleagues in Washington State and Oregon, where they did not introduce state legislation, but they simply changed building codes locally. And so we very much at Crowd in the policy work are looking to some of our other colleagues elsewhere outside of New York State for models and language and templates around how they are moving forward with this work.
Yeah, it's a great development to see it sort of coming up to the state level and people really thinking it through, because that is the big question, is like with a lot of the material, if people do want to use it in a structural way, building codes have to be, matching this, and then the suitability has to be matching all of these efforts as well.
Great. Well, seeing no other questions in the chat, Christine, is there anything that you would like to end on?
I think I just want people to really think about the built environment as it exists and how it actually does contribute to sustainability. We talk a lot now about upfront carbon and talk about sufficiency. Those are sort of big terms that are coming up in the sustainability world. Like if you have enough, can you improve the enough, rehabilitate the existing building or add to it, to keep it viable? And rather than everything having to be a blank slate, knocked down and starting from scratch because of the tremendous amount of energy that it takes to build a brand new building, even a very green one with like LEED certification and everything. And this is really what Carl Elefante is talking about. Like we already have these existing buildings. In what ways can you work with them by rehabbing them or adding to them to make them viable for the future? And I think that's something that, we really have to talk about when we are looking at buildings. And that's not to say there'll be never any new construction, but you could have new construction with regraded lumber and deconstructed building materials, certainly. And we've seen cases of that out in Colorado where they have been using various building materials to build new buildings in a structural way. So I just hope that everybody keeps that in mind and sees that preservation really is a green practice.
Speaking of Carl Elefante, one plug for the Build Reuse Conference. But for those of you, Build Reuse is a national organization that specifically focuses on building materials and the circular construction economy. Carl Elefante is one of the keynote speakers at this year's conference in August in St. Paul. It's the 4th through the 6th of August. I put the link to Build Reuse in the chat. It's a really valuable, really fun, really inspiring few days with people from all over the country and beyond who are working to promote the circular construction economy. So if that's of all your interest, I cannot recommend this conference highly enough. And you will get to hear Carl Elefante in real life say what Christine has said and to really drive those points home again.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Gretchen. And that website, the Build Reuse website, is an excellent resource as well. They're the national organization dedicated to building reuse, and I really think that they've done excellent work, especially with their educational material. So I would encourage anyone curious about deconstruction and building reuse to take a look at that website as well.
Right. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending. Gretchen, I'm going to hand it back over to you to wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Christine and Brian, for a great presentation. Thank you all for coming and really fabulous questions and conversation. So I will just repeat my offer or my request from the beginning, which is that we are now starting to plan our fall crowd conversations. We take a little hiatus during the summertime. So if there's a particular topic that you would like to hear presented on, or if there's a particular speaker who is doing work in the circular construction economy, whether in New York State, in your community, beyond, then please reach out either to me directly at projectdirector@christoffersoncenter.org or through the crowd website. You can fill out the contact form and submit that with your idea. And we really want to continue to make these useful for everybody attending. So happy to hear any of your ideas or thoughts. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely summer, and we will hope to see you back for our crowd conversations in the fall. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.